Yeah! What's good, YouTube? Frankie J here, back again with another episode of the Fantasy Blitz Show. Week 1 officially in the books. Those games were crazy, some good, some bad, but that's all in the past. Let's move on to Week 2 as I give you some of my starts and sits of this week. Starting off with the QB position, I'm picking Jordan Love versus the Atlanta Falcons this week. Jordan Love played phenomenal last week, had 3 touchdowns. Now, there is a little scare that he may not be playing with his big playmakers this week, as in Aaron Jones and Christian Watson, all dealing with a hamstring injury. Romeo Doubs also has a lingering one, but he did play last week and saw 2 touchdowns. So, I still see a decent game for Jordan Love this week, especially if there's no Aaron Jones or Christian Watson. But if they do play, it's going to be a huge game for Jordan Love. I suggest you guys put him in your starting lineup, especially in Superflex leagues. My next QB on this list is going to be Jared Goff versus the Seattle Seahawks. Mind you, I want you guys to pay attention to this stat, all right? They're playing home. When Jared Goff is at home, he's a different type of QB, honestly, bro. Last year, he averaged 21.6 fantasy points and 2.5 touchdowns each game at home. The Seattle defense isn't looking like what we thought it would be, honestly. Last week, they let Matt Stafford throw for 334 yards. Jared Goff just played last Thursday, had a great game against Kansas City, and they weren't home. So honestly, Jared Goff at home, 20 fantasy points seems about right. 2 touchdowns against this lackluster Seattle defense. Yeah, I like that too. So definitely plug him in. Now let's go into some running backs of my choice. First one is going to be Kenneth Walker versus the Detroit Lions, okay? Now, going back to that Seattle versus Detroit matchup, as I just said about Jared Goff, Detroit's run defense isn't all that great, let alone their secondary. We saw Kansas City do a couple things, even though they end up losing that game, but it wasn't because of their defense. It was just mainly because their wide receivers were playing like shit. But Kenneth Walker was OD efficient last week, honestly. He averaged 5.3 yards per carry, which is incredible, honestly. Only downside of Kenneth Walker last week is that he did not see the end zone, and all this talk about Zach Charbonnet eating into his work, I think that's just all bullshit, because we saw Walker take the whole backfield completely to himself, outsnapped and outplayed Charbonnet. I see him completely blowing up this Detroit Lions defense in this matchup. Definitely a plug-in that you should have as your RB1, if not RB2. Seattle didn't look great last week, but I think in this one, they're going to end up balancing out their defense. You know, last week we saw Geno not rise up to the occasion when the ball had to be in his hands for them to make a comeback. So I think they're definitely going to balance it out. They're going to do run, pass, and then run some more. So Kenneth Walker this week, that's a go. My next running back is going to be Saquon Barkley versus the Arizona Cardinals. I see a huge bounce back game for Saquon Barkley, as last week was just an absolute disaster for this New York Giants team. That really had nothing to do with him. It was all about that Dallas defense who completely shut him out, and there was no point of running the ball with Saquon Barkley anymore if they were down 40-0, honestly. And we already know Saquon Barkley is not going to let that happen again. So y'all should be more than excited to play him this week against this poor Arizona defense. Now on to the wide receiver position. My first pick is going to be Mike Evans against the Chicago Bears. With Baker as the QB in Tampa Bay, honestly, Mike Evans most likely is going to be a start for me every week, unless the matchup is horrendous or Baker Mayfield goes down or Mike Evans himself goes down. But apart from that, Mike Evans is definitely somebody you should play all the time. Mike Evans finished as the wide receiver 13, and the connection and chemistry he already has with Baker Mayfield is great to see, especially early, and this should translate to another 1,000-yard season for Mike Evans. We also saw what Green Bay did to this Chicago secondary, and honestly, I see Tampa Bay probably just doing the same to them as well, so Mike Evans is a start for me. For my next wide receiver, it's going to be Mike Williams versus Tennessee Titans. Now, I know Mike Williams was a letdown last week. He definitely let me down. I lost in one of my leagues because he did not produce. He did kind of get hurt, but came back in this one. But there's no way that's going to happen again, especially against this Tennessee's secondary, who was horrific last week against New Orleans Saints. They gave up the second most fantasy points to wide receivers last week. It was bad, honestly. And I see Mike Williams and Keenan Allen a must start this week, especially in this matchup. And now let's move on to our sit category. Some of these players, if you have them, I'm sorry, but you should definitely reconsider starting them this week. Starting with the QB position, we got Dak Prescott versus the New York Giants. We didn't get to see a good look at what this offense was going to look like this season last week because obviously the Dallas defense totally took over that game and they didn't have to do much on offense, but Tony Pollard did end up having 2 touchdowns. No thanks to Dak Prescott, honestly. He didn't do much, but I don't blame him. And yes, Dallas defense looks real good, but my New York Jets defense ain't no joke. I ain't gonna lie to you. So since we haven't really gotten a good look at what Dak Prescott is gonna look like this year, if he turns back into that turnover monster he was last year, you Dak owners fans about to be mad as hell this week. For my next QB, I got Jimmy G against the Buffalo Bills. I ain't gonna lie, I was really surprised to see Jimmy G finish at the QB 12 last week, but Buffalo this week is gonna come out with a vengeance. That game, week 1 against my boys, who, I don't want to talk about it, but we did come out with the W. While we made Josh Allen have 4 turnovers that game, 3 of them was a pick, 1 was a fumble. Telling you about our defense, baby. And honestly, Jimmy G is going to have to pay for it with this defense because they're not going to let that shit happen again. And Buffalo's defense only gave up 9.2 fantasy points to the QB position last week. So I don't see Jimmy G performing what he did last week. Probably more to that 9.2 fantasy points this week. So definitely sit him on your bench this week. And now on to the running back position. My first pick this week to sit is going to be Najee Harris versus the Cleveland Browns. As I always like to say, division matchups are always a toss-up. And for that same reason, honestly, I'm probably wrong about sitting him this week. But honestly, I'm going to stick to what I said about him this offseason. He is going to be a bust this year. So if you guys drafted him round 3 or higher, that's definitely gonna cost you guys. And Cleveland's defense is no joke either. They're a tough one to run on, and honestly, depending on how this game script plays out, I can see Pittsburgh being down in this one, so there's probably going to be a lot more passing work, and Najee Harris is not really in on those passing plays, so Jaylen Warren may see even more work this week. So Najee Harris, you're a sit. For my next running back on this list is going to be Alexander Mattison versus the Philadelphia Eagles. This is the Thursday night game. I'm actually recording this on Thursday, so you guys are going to see this. This is going to be a quick one, honestly. Last week, Alexander Madison's owners, you guys, you know who I'm talking to. You guys were lucky to see that he saw the end zone last week, honestly, because he was incredibly inefficient last week. He averaged 3.1 yards per carry on 11 touches. What's up with that, honestly? And now having to go against this tough, very tough Philly defense, honestly, I don't think he gets that lucky this week. So Alexander Mattison, go ahead and take a seat back, homie. On to the wide receivers position. This pick is very upsetting, but Garrett Wilson versus the Dallas Cowboys, I gotta sit you, homie, and it pains me to say this. Pains me, all right? This one's a real sensitive one for me, mainly because of the Aaron Rodgers injury. This caused Garrett Wilson's value and projections for the rest of the season to completely fall, and that's not good for owners like me who drafted him real high. And truthfully, Zach Wilson has to prove to me he can be an above-average quarterback, honestly. And if he can, that's where we'll maybe see more production out of Garrett Wilson, honestly. But if he can't, I got to sit him, and it hurts. And we're playing against this Dallas defense, which we saw completely shut down the New York Giants. But Garrett Wilson, I feel for you. Aaron Rodgers, get well. but I gotta sit you, homie. And for my last sit on this list, I gotta go with Drake London versus the Green Bay Packers. I think this is an obvious one, but I can't help but feel bad for him, especially in this offense, because they have no trust in Desmond Ridder. He only threw the ball 18 times last week, and some people might say, oh, but Carolina sucked, so they were up, so they didn't need to pass the ball. They had those two-headed monsters in the backfield, so why do we need to pass it? Bro, that's not what you want to see out of fantasy, honestly. Out of fantasy perspective, you still want to see a quarterback throw for at least 24 if not 25 times a game, and he only did 18. That's horrible. Drake London is going to be shadowed by Jair Alexander this week, who locked up DJ Moore last week. So Drake London is definitely a sit for me. And I see another weak performance from him, especially in weeks coming, unless they can change up that offense and put a little more trust in Desmond Ridder. So that's all I got for you guys today. If you guys enjoyed this content, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for more fantasy football content like this. But with all that said, I'm Frankie J. This is the Fantasy Blitz Show, and we out. Peace.